Millionaire ignores girl who was crying for food, but was paralyzed by what he discovered. Are you my father? Before we dive into this heartwarming story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to connect with viewers from around the world. Now let's begin this incredible journey of love and redemption. The sleek black Porsche purred to life as Marcus Blackwell adjusted his Italian silk tie, checking his Rolex one last time. At 42, he had built Blackwell Industries into one of Manhattan's most powerful companies, transforming from a driven young man into one of New York's most successful CEOs. However, success had come at a great cost, leaving him little time for anything beyond board meetings and quarterly reports. Another profitable day, Marcus murmured, reviewing the evening's acquisition papers while his car idled in the underground parking garage. The merger with Henderson Corp would add another $50 million to his portfolio, a victory that should have felt more satisfying than it did. But as he pulled onto the busy street, something caught his attention. A small figure huddled near the sidewalk. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, sat beside a crumbling brick wall, her tiny hand extended toward passing pedestrians. Her clothes were tattered, her dark hair tangled, and her brown eyes held a desperation that seemed too mature for someone so young. "Please," she called out, her voice barely audible above the rush of traffic. "I'm so hungry. Just a little food." Marcus's first instinct was to ignore her, just like he did with the city's homeless. Business was business, charity was a tax write-off, and personal involvement was a luxury he couldn't afford. He pressed the accelerator, determined to keep his schedule. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way her small shoulders trembled in the evening chill, or how she thanked every person who ignored her. Whatever it was, Marcus found himself stopping the car. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he stared at the girl through his rearview mirror. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I have dinner with the Morrison Group in an hour." But despite himself, he couldn't bring himself to drive away. Marcus parked the car and walked toward her, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing against the concrete. Up close, she looked even smaller and more fragile. Her eyes widened as she saw him kneel beside her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, surprised by the softness in his own voice. "Sophie," she whispered, instinctively backing against the wall. "Sophie, when did you last eat?" Marcus asked. But before she could answer, her stomach gave a loud rumble, causing her cheeks to flush bright red. I don't remember," Sophie replied quietly, without fully understanding. "Why?" Marcus extended his hand. "Would you like to have dinner with me, Sophie? Somewhere warm?" What was it about this little girl that made the cold-hearted CEO of Manhattan stop? And why did her innocent smile remind him of someone he couldn't quite place? The exclusive Delqua restaurant had never seen a guest like Sophie. The maitre d' raised an eyebrow as Marcus walked in with the disheveled child, but years of experience in serving New York's elite had taught him to maintain discretion. "Your usual table, Mr. Blackwell?" Henry asked smoothly, guiding them to a private corner booth. Sophie's eyes widened as she took in the grandeur of the crystal chandeliers, pristine white tablecloths, and the soft music that filled the air. "It's like a palace," she whispered, sliding carefully into the velvet seat as if she were afraid she might break something. Marcus watched her with growing curiosity. Despite the hunger she was clearly feeling, Sophie displayed surprising manners. She sat up straight, placed her napkin on her lap without being asked, and politely said, "Please, and thank you to the waitstaff." "Order whatever you'd like," Marcus said, studying her face as she stared at the leather-bound menu. "I can't read all the words," Sophie admitted quietly. "But could I have chicken? And maybe some bread?" Marcus ordered a simple grilled chicken meal for her and watched in amazement as she devoured every bite with methodical precision, as though each piece might be her last. Between bites, he gently probed for more information. "Sophie, where do you live?" The little girl paused, a forkful of mashed potatoes halfway to her mouth. "Sometimes different places, mostly outside," she murmured. "Now what about your family? Your parents?" Sophie's expression grew distant, and for a moment, she seemed far older than her 6 years. Mama got really sad after the man stopped coming, she said, her voice quiet. She cried all the time. Her voice trailed off. Then what, sweetheart? Marcus asked gently. She went away, like the other people do. The casual way Sophie spoke about others disappearing sent a chill through Marcus. This wasn't just about one missing mother. There was a pattern here, something darker. Sophie, can you tell me about your mama? What did she look like? Sophie thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. Pretty brown hair like mine. She was a nurse and helped sick people feel better. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She said the important man promised to take care of us, but then he stopped coming and Mama got sick. In her heart. An important man? Marcus leaned forward, his curiosity growing. What did he look like? Sophie concentrated hard, her small face scrunching in thought. Tall gray hair, fancy clothes like yours, she said. He smelled like the medicine Mama gave me when I was sick. She paused, tilting her head. He looked kind of like you. Marcus felt his blood run cold. The description was vague, but something about it gnawed at him. Sophie, what was your mama's full name? Elena Martinez, she said softly. Our last name means warrior in Spanish. As Sophie finished her meal, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was no coincidence. Who was this important man who had abandoned Elena and Sophie? And why did he feel as though he was on the verge of uncovering secrets that would change his life forever? Marcus's penthouse apartment, a monument to minimalist luxury and corporate success, had never been designed for children. Floor to ceiling, windows offered breathtaking views of Manhattan, but the space felt cold and sterile, much like its owner had been until just a few hours ago. Sophie stood in the marble entryway, clutching a small, worn backpack that contained her only possessions. Her eyes were wide with wonder as she took in the pristine white furniture, the expensive artwork, and the complete absence of anything warm or welcoming. This is where I live, Marcus said, suddenly seeing his home through a child's eyes. He felt oddly embarrassed by its emptiness. It's very big, Sophie whispered, her voice echoing in the spacious living room. Do you live here all by yourself? Yes. The word hung in the air, sounding lonelier than Marcus had ever realized. Within an hour, Marcus had made 3 crucial phone calls. First, he contacted his assistant Jennifer and instructed her to clear his morning schedule. Second, he canceled his dinner meeting with the Morrison Group. Third, he called an agency specializing in emergency childcare services. You've done what? Victoria Blackwell Sterling's voice shrieked through the phone when Marcus called to explain his absence from their weekly business dinner. Victoria, I've picked up a little girl off the street. She needs help. She's not random, Victoria. She's a little girl who needs help, Marcus snapped, his patience thinning. And what exactly do you plan to do with her? A playhouse? You don't know the first thing about children, Victoria retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Marcus glanced over at Sophie, who was carefully examining a crystal sculpture on his coffee table. Her small fingers traced its edges with reverence. I'm learning, Marcus said quietly but firmly. This is ridiculous. I'm coming over right now, Victoria declared. No, Marcus said firmly, cutting her off. Not tonight. Sophie needs rest, and I need to figure out what's best for her. At 8 UARI, Rosalie Henderson arrived. Warm, competent, a woman in her 50s who specialized in caring for children in crisis. She took one look at Sophie and immediately began creating a safe space in the guest bedroom, transforming it with soft blankets and a small lamp that cast gentle shadows on the walls. She's been through significant trauma, Rosalie observed quietly as Sophie took her first real bath in weeks. Children don't just end up on the streets alone, there's always a story. Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening with determination. I intend to find out what that story is. As Sophie settled into the makeshift bedroom, Marcus made one final call to Nathaniel Pierce, the most discreet private investigator in Manhattan. I need you to find out everything about Elena Martinez, Marcus explained. A nurse, probably worked at a hospital, had a 6-year-old daughter named Sophie. She disappeared approximately 3 months ago. Consider it done, Mr. Blackwell. Nathaniel replied. I'll start first thing tomorrow. Just after midnight, Marcus was awakened by screaming. He rushed to Sophie's room and found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, her small body shaking with terror. Elena, she cried out desperately. Elena, come back. Please don't leave me. Marcus sat beside her, gently pulling her into his arms. It's okay, Sophie. You're safe now. I dreamed about Mama, Sophie sobbed against his chest. She was calling for the important man to help us, but he kept walking away. As Marcus held the frightened child, he made a silent promise to himself. He would find Elena Martinez, uncover what happened to her, and ensure Sophie never felt abandoned again. But little did he know, his investigation would lead him straight into the darkest secrets of his own family. The Manhattan Children's Hospital annual charity gala was the type of event Marcus usually navigated with practiced ease. An evening of strategic networking, disguised as philanthropy, where million-dollar donations secured both tax benefits and social standing. But tonight felt different. Instead of arriving alone in his usual tailored tuxedo, Marcus held Sophie's hand as they entered the ballroom. She wore a simple blue dress that Rosalie had bought for her that afternoon, her hair neatly braided, looking like any other well-cared-for child, except for the weariness that still haunted her eyes. Stay close to me, Marcus whispered, as photographers' flashes began capturing their unexpected entrance. The reaction was immediate. Conversations halted mid-sentence as New York's social elite processed the sight of the city's most notorious bachelor, walking in with a small child. Marcus Blackwell with a daughter? Since when? Must be some kind of publicity stunt. I heard he's been acting strange lately, missing meetings. Victoria materialized beside them, her smile tight and artificial. Well, you actually brought her. She leaned down to Sophie's level. Hello, dear. I'm Victoria, Marcus's sister. Sophie instinctively moved closer to Marcus, her small hand gripping his jacket. She looks mean, Sophie whispered loudly enough for Victoria to hear. Victoria's smile faltered, but before she could respond, a deep, commanding voice interrupted. Marcus, there you are. I've been looking for you. Charles Blackwell, at 68, still commanded attention wherever he went. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of presence that built empires, he approached with his usual confidence, completely unaware of the bombshell walking beside his son. Father, Marcus acknowledged coolly. I'd like you to meet Sophie. Charles barely glanced at the child. Charming, he muttered, before turning his attention back to Marcus. We need to discuss the Henderson merger. Your absence yesterday was noted by several board members. But, as Charles continued speaking, something extraordinary happened. Sophie began to tremble violently, her face draining of color. She pressed herself against Marcus's leg, her breathing shallow and rapid. No, she whispered, her voice filled with terror. No. No, no. Marcus immediately knelt beside her. Sophie, what's wrong? That voice, she gasped, staring at Charles with wide, frightened eyes. That's the voice from Mama's phone calls. The man who made Mama cry. The color drained from Charles's face. For a moment, the confident patriarch stumbled over his words. What is she talking about? I've never seen this child before in my life, but Sophie was backing away, her small voice growing stronger with each word. You promised Mama you'd take care of us, Sophie said. You said you loved her, but then you stopped coming and Mama cried every night. The ballroom around them went silent. Every eye was fixed on the unfolding drama as Sophie's child's voice carried clearly across the room. Mama showed me your picture. She said you were important. But you lied. You left us alone. Charles looked around frantically at the watching crowd, his carefully constructed reputation crumbling with every word Sophie spoke. This is ridiculous. I don't know what game you're playing, Marcus, but lay off the games, Father, Marcus said quietly, his arm protectively around Sophie. But I think it's time we talked. As the implications of Sophie's recognition sank in, Marcus realized that his simple act of kindness had led him to the threshold of a family secret that would destroy everything he thought he knew about. The man he'd called father. The aftermath of the charity gala forced Marcus to make a choice he never would have considered just days earlier. Instead of damage control meetings and corporate spin, he canceled his entire week to focus on Sophie, who had been deeply shaken by her encounter with Charles. "I don't want to go outside," Sophie whispered on Tuesday morning, still in her pajamas at noon. "What if the mean man finds me?" Marcus, who hadn't taken a sick day in 15 years, called Jennifer again. "Cancel the Morrison presentation. Postpone the Tokyo conference call. Everything can wait." "Sir, the board is asking questions. Mr. Charles specifically requested." "Tell my father that family emergencies take precedence over board meetings," Marcus said, his words surprising him as they left his lips. But they felt right. The word family felt different now. By Wednesday, Marcus discovered the simple joy of playing hooky. He took Sophie to Central Park, where she marveled at the carousel and laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time since he'd found her. At the zoo, she pressed her face against the glass of the penguin exhibit and clapped when they dove into the water. "They're so funny," Sophie giggled, her earlier fears temporarily forgotten. "Do you think they're happy living there?" Marcus asked softly. "I think they're safe," Sophie replied, understanding now how precious safety could be. Sometimes, being safe is the first step to being happy. At the bookstore, Sophie's eyes lit up at the children's section. "Mama used to read to me," she said softly, running her fingers along the colorful spines. She did different voices for all the characters. Marcus found himself purchasing an armload of picture books, promising to read one every night. That evening, as he stumbled through the little prints with dramatically different voices for each character, Sophie curled against his side on the couch. "You're getting better at the voices," she said sleepily. "Marcus Papy," she added, quietly, the words hitting him like a lightning bolt. "What did you call me?" Marcus asked, his voice a whisper. Sophie looked up at him with innocent brown eyes. "Marcus Papy. Is that okay? You take care of me like a papa would." Marcus's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. That's more than okay." Rosalie, watching from the kitchen doorway, smiled knowingly. "She's good for you, Mr. Blackwell. I've never seen you so relaxed." On Friday afternoon, while Sophie napped, Marcus retreated to his home office to catch up on urgent emails. The room held years of business achievements, awards, photos with world leaders, newspaper clippings of major deals. Sophie wandered in, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's all this?" she asked, examining the wall of photographs. "Just work stuff," Marcus replied, not looking up from his laptop. Sophie stopped in front of a particular photo. Marcus and Charles at the groundbreaking ceremony for Blackwell Industries headquarters 5 years ago. Both men wore hard hats and triumphant smiles, arms around each other's shoulders. "Oh no," Sophie whispered, her voice filled with terror. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Marcus spun around to find Sophie backing away from the photograph, her small body trembling violently. "Sophie, what's wrong?" "That's him," she gasped, pointing directly at Charles in the photo. "That's the man who made Mama cry. That's the man who promised to take care of us." The photograph seemed to mock Marcus as the truth crystallized in his mind. His father, his own father, had been the important man who had abandoned Elena and Sophie. As Sophie collapsed into Marcus's arms, sobbing with the weight of recognition, Marcus realized that his act of charity had led him to the center of a family betrayal that would change everything forever. Nathaniel Pierce had built his reputation on discretion and results. When he arrived at Marcus's penthouse on Monday morning, his leather briefcase contained information that would shatter a family. "You were right to call me, Mr. Blackwell," Pierce said, settling into Marcus's office chair. Elena Martinez's story is both tragic and revealing. Sophie was at her first day of a nearby private school, a carefully chosen environment where she could begin healing while Marcus uncovered the truth. Rosalie had assured him the transition would be supervised and gentle. "What did you find?" Marcus asked, his coffee growing cold as he focused entirely on Pierce's words. Pierce pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. Elena Martinez, aged 28, worked as a registered nurse at Manhattan Presbyterian Hospital, For 3 years, she specialized in cardiac care, particularly in the VIP wing. Marcus's stomach tightened. Manhattan Presbyterian was where his father received his regular heart treatments. She lived in a modest apartment in Queens, paid for through an account linked to offshore holdings. The rent was consistently paid for 18 months, then stopped. Abruptly 3 months ago, Pierce slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Elena Martinez, a beautiful young woman with kind eyes and long dark hair. She wore scrubs and was smiling at the camera, probably during a hospital event. "She looks so young," Marcus murmured, studying the photo. She was 24 when she started at Presbyterian, 26 when Sophie was born. Pierce's expression was grim. "There's more. I found these in Elena's apartment." He pulled out a small stack of letters, handwritten in delicate script. "The landlord let me search after I explained I was looking for next of kin. These were hidden in a shoebox under her bed." Marcus took the first letter, his hands trembling slightly as he read Elena's words. "My dearest C. Sophie took her first steps today. She's so beautiful, just like you said she would be. I wish you could have been here to see it. You promised we would be a family, that you would leave your wife once the business deal was finished. I'm still waiting, still believing in your words. Sophie asks about her papa every day. What should I tell her?" The letters continued, each one more desperate than the last. "I saw the announcement about your son's promotion in the newspaper. I'm happy for your family's success, but what about our family? Sophie is getting older and asking harder questions. The money you send helps, but she needs her father. I need you." The final letter was dated 6 months ago. "Charles, I can't pretend anymore. I know you're never going to choose us. I see how you look at me now, like I'm a problem to be solved rather than someone you once claimed to love. Sophie deserves better than a father who hides her existence. If something happens to me, I've left information that will ensure she finds her way to safety. Your son Marcus seems like a good man from what I've read. Maybe he'll be better than you." Marcus set the letter down with shaking hands. She knew. Elena knew she was in danger. "There's more," Pierce said quietly. His records show that Charles Blackwell was Elena's direct patient for over a year. Staff members remember them being friendly, though relationships between patients and medical staff are strictly forbidden. Pierce handed him another document, Sophie's birth certificate, Elena Martinez, father listed as unknown. But then, something caught Marcus's eye. From the folder, Pierce withdrew a small photo, Charles Blackwell holding a baby, his face soft with tenderness, something Marcus had never seen before. On the back of the photo, in Elena's handwriting, it read, "Charles with Sophie, 3 months old." He promised this was just the beginning. As Marcus stared at the photograph of his father cradling the child he had abandoned, the full scope of Charles's betrayal became clear. But if Elena had left information to ensure Sophie's safety, what other secrets were waiting to be uncovered? The address Elena had hidden in her final letter led Marcus to a storage unit in Queens, a small climate-controlled space that held the remnants of a life destroyed by abandonment and false promises. Pierce had arranged for legal access through Elena's emergency contact information, which listed Sophie's safety as the primary concern. As Marcus opened the metal door, he felt like an archaeologist uncovering a tragic civilization. Inside were cardboard boxes labeled in Elena's careful handwriting, Sophie's baby things, medical records, legal documents, and one box simply labeled, Truth. Marcus opened the truth box first, his heart pounding as he discovered Elena's methodical documentation of her relationship with Charles. There were printed emails, recorded phone conversations on a small digital device, photographs of Charles with Sophie at various ages, and a detailed timeline of promises made and broken. The emails were devastating in their intimacy and growing desperation. "Charles, you said after the merger you would tell your family about us. The merger happened 6 months ago. Sophie is walking now and says Dada when she sees your photo. When are you coming home to us?" Charles's response was cold and businesslike. "Elena, we discussed this. The timing isn't right. The family situation is complicated. Be patient." But the most damning evidence was a recorded phone call from 8 months ago. Marcus listened to his father's voice, clear and unmistakable. Elena, you need to understand your position. I have a reputation, a business, a family legacy to protect. Sophie is a complication I didn't plan for. Elena's voice, tearful, but dignified, responded, "She's your daughter, Charles, not a complication. She loves you. I never promised to leave Evelyn. You misunderstood our arrangement." Arrangement? Charles's voice broke. "I'm fond of you both, but be realistic. I'll continue supporting you financially, but that's all I can offer." Marcus had to pause the recording, his hands shaking with rage. This wasn't just abandonment. It was calculated cruelty. The legal documents box contained Elena's will, naming Marcus as Sophie's guardian if anything happened to her. Attached was a letter dated just 2 months ago. "Mr. Marcus Blackwell, I pray you never have to read this, but if you do, it means something has happened to me and Sophie needs help. I know this will be shocking, but Sophie is your father's daughter, your half-sister. I've documented everything because I knew Charles would never admit the truth. I chose you because everything I've read suggests you're a better man than your father. Sophie is innocent in all of this. She's brilliant, kind, and deserves a chance at happiness. I know I'm asking the impossible, but please don't let her end up in the system. She's already lost so much." The letter continued. "There's one more thing you need to know. Charles didn't just abandon us emotionally. Last month, he stopped the financial support completely and threatened legal action if I ever contacted him again. He said his lawyers would handle any future complications. I'm scared, Marcus. Not for me, but for Sophie. If you're reading this, please tell her that her mama loved her more than anything in the world." Marcus wiped his eyes, not caring that Pierce could see his tears. In the final box, Sophie's baby things, he found photo albums documenting every milestone Charles had missed. First steps, first words, birthdays celebrated alone, while Charles lived his public life just miles away. "There's something else," Pierce said quietly, holding a medical report. "An autopsy," Marcus murmured, his blood running cold. "Autopsy?" He stared at Pierce, stunned. "Marcus, Elena didn't just disappear. She's dead." Pierce's expression was grave as he handed Marcus the medical examiner's report. Elena Martinez had died 3 months ago from an apparent overdose of prescription medication. "But Marcus, there are inconsistencies." Marcus scanned the document, his legal training helping him decode the medical terminology. "Inconsistencies? How?" Elena was found in her apartment with empty bottles of antidepressants and sleep aids. The official ruling was suicide. But, Pierce paused, looking at Marcus meaningfully. The medication wasn't prescribed to her. The prescriptions were filled using stolen prescription pads from Manhattan Presbyterian, specifically from the cardiac unit where she worked. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone with access to the hospital's prescription system, or someone with influence over medical staff, Pierce added. "Marcus, your father has been a major donor to Manhattan Presbyterian for years. He sits on their board of directors." Marcus sat down, the report slipping from his hands. His mind raced through darker possibilities than he wanted to consider. "Are you suggesting my father had something to do with Elena's death?" "I'm suggesting the timing is suspicious. Elena's final text messages recovered from her phone show she was planning to contact you directly. She'd scheduled an appointment with a family attorney for the week she died." Pierce showed him printouts of Elena's final text messages sent to an unknown number. "I can't live like this anymore. Sophie deserves better. If you won't acknowledge her, I'll find someone who will. Your son Marcus seems like a decent man. Maybe he'll do what you won't. I have documentation of everything, Charles. Every promise you made, every lie you told. Sophie won't grow up believing her father didn't want her." The unknown number she was texting, Pierce asked rhetorically, registered to a shell company that traces back to Blackwell Industries' legal department. Marcus felt sick. Elena had been threatening to expose him. 3 days later, she was found dead, with medication she never had access to, officially ruled a suicide despite having no history of mental health treatment or suicidal ideation. That evening, Marcus sat Sophie down in their living room knowing he could no longer protect her from painful truths. "Sophie, we need to talk about Mama." Her small face grew serious. Did you find her? Marcus took her hands gently. Sweetheart, Mama can't come back. She went to heaven 3 months ago. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't seem surprised. I knew, she whispered. In my heart, I knew she wasn't coming back. She was so sad at the end. The important man, Marcus, asked carefully. Did he ever come to your apartment in the last few months? Sophie nodded. He came one night and made Mama cry. He was angry and said mean things. He told her to be smart and think about Sophie's future. Then Mama got very scared. Marcus's protective instincts flared. Did he ever hurt you? Or Mama? Not with his hands, Sophie said softly. But Mama cried for days after he left. She kept saying, I'm sorry, baby. Mama tried so hard to give you a daddy. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus called Pierce. I want you to investigate Elena's death more thoroughly, and I want everything you can find on my father's activities over the last 3 months. Marcus, if your suspicions are correct, we're talking about potential murder charges against one of New York's most powerful men. Then we need to be absolutely certain before we act, Marcus said, his voice hardening with resolve. Because if Charles Blackwell killed Sophie's mother to protect his reputation, I'll make sure he pays for it. As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized he wasn't just seeking justice for Elena anymore. He was at war with his own father, and Sophie's life might depend on winning. Sophie's fever started as a slight warmth during their evening story time. But by midnight, she was burning up with a temperature that sent Marcus into a panic he'd never experienced, even after years of high-stakes business negotiations. Daddy, Sophie whispered weakly from her bed, the word coming naturally, now despite their short time together. I can't stop shaking. Marcus bundled her into blankets and rushed to Manhattan Presbyterian's emergency room, the same hospital where Elena had worked and Charles had received treatment. The irony wasn't lost on him as he carried Sophie through the doors, where her mother had once cared for patients. Pneumonia, Dr. Sarah Chen diagnosed after examining Sophie's chest x-rays. It was severe enough to require hospitalization. Children who've experienced trauma and malnutrition are particularly susceptible, Dr. Chen explained. As Sophie was admitted to the pediatric intensive care unit, Marcus refused to leave her side. He canceled board meetings, ignored Victoria's increasingly frantic calls, and settled into the uncomfortable chair beside Sophie's hospital bed, with the determination of a man who had finally found his true purpose. Sir, you really should go home and rest, the night nurse suggested. On the second day, we'll call if there's any change. I'm not leaving her, Marcus replied firmly. She's been abandoned enough for one lifetime. On the third night, Sophie's fever spiked dangerously high, causing her to drift in and out of delirium. In those fevered moments, she began speaking words that broke Marcus's heart and filled him with murderous rage toward his father. Mama, don't cry, Sophie whispered to invisible figures. The important man said he'd take care of us. He promised, Mama. Marcus leaned closer, recording her words with his phone as evidence of the trauma Charles had inflicted. He has the same eyes as me, Mama. Why doesn't he want to be my daddy? Sophie's small voice was filled with confusion, a confusion no child should ever experience. Then, more clearly, she said, he said we were a mistake. He said his real family wouldn't understand. But, Mama, I would be good. I would be so good if he'd just loved me. Marcus had to step into the hallway, his hands shaking with rage. Charles hadn't just abandoned Sophie. He'd actively rejected her, calling her a mistake to her face. Mr. Blackwell? Dr. Chen appeared beside him. Sophie's fever is breaking, but I need to discuss something with you. What is it? During our routine blood work, we noticed some genetic markers that suggest Sophie might have a predisposition to certain conditions that run in families. Given that you're caring for her, I'd recommend genetic testing to identify any potential health risks. Marcus paused. What kind of genetic testing? Standard familial screening. If there's any biological relationship between you two, it would help us understand her medical history better. Dr. Chen studied him carefully, I know she's not your biological daughter, but sometimes families have connections we don't initially realize. Doctor, what would the testing involve? Simple blood samples from both of you. We can have results within 48 hours. Marcus looked back through the glass at Sophie, now sleeping peacefully as her fever subsided. Schedule the testing. That evening, as Sophie's condition stabilized, she opened her eyes and smiled weakly at Marcus. Daddy, you stayed. I'll always stay, sweetheart, I promise. The important man never stayed when I was sick, Sophie said quietly. He said sick children were too much trouble. Marcus took her small hand in his. Sophie, you're never too much trouble. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. As she drifted back to sleep, Marcus made a silent vow. Whatever the DNA test revealed, whatever legal battles lay ahead, he would protect this child with everything he had. But he had no idea that the genetic testing would reveal a connection even more shocking than he'd imagined. One that would finally give him the ammunition he needed to destroy Charles Blackwell, once and for all. Dr. Chen's call came as Marcus sat beside Sophie's hospital bed, watching her color slowly return to normal after 3 days of fighting pneumonia. Her small hand was curled around his finger, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she looked peaceful. Mr. Blackwell, could you meet me in my office? The genetic testing results are back. Marcus's heart pounded as he gently extracted his finger from Sophie's grip and made his way down the sterile hospital corridor. Dr. Chen's office was small and cluttered with medical journals, but her expression was both professional and compassionate. Please sit down, she said, holding a manila envelope. Marcus, I need to ask you something first. Is there any possibility that Sophie could be related to you biologically? Why do you ask? Dr. Chen opened the envelope and spread the test results across her desk. Because according to these results, Sophie Elena Martinez is your half-sister. The genetic markers are unmistakable. You share the same father. Even though Marcus had suspected this truth for days, hearing it confirmed scientifically hit him like a physical blow. Sophie wasn't just some abandoned child he'd rescued, she was his sister, his family, his blood. You're absolutely certain? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 100%. The DNA doesn't lie, Marcus. Sophie is definitely your half-sister. Marcus stared at the scientific data that confirmed what his heart had already known. Charles Blackwell had fathered a child with Elena Martinez, abandoned both mother and daughter, and then possibly orchestrated Elena's death to cover up his shame. There's something else, Dr. Chen continued. The genetic screening revealed that Sophie carries markers for a rare blood disorder, one that requires careful monitoring but is completely manageable with proper care. It's hereditary, which means her father likely carries the same markers. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. Doctor, these results, can they be used as legal evidence? Absolutely. They're court admissible. She studied him carefully. Marcus, I don't know the full story here, but I can see that little girl loves you deeply. Whatever complicated situation brought you together, she's lucky to have you. When Marcus returned to Sophie's room, she was awake and alert for the first time in days. Daddy, I feel better. Can we go home soon? Yes, sweetheart, very soon. Marcus sat beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. Sophie, I have something important to tell you. Her brown eyes, so like his own, he realized now, focused on his face with complete trust. We're family, Sophie. Real family, you're my sister. Sophie's face lit up with joy. Like sister and brother? Exactly. Like sister and brother. We have the same father, the important man. Sophie's expression grew confused. But he didn't want me. Marcus's jaw tightened with protective fury. Sophie, listen to me carefully. Just because someone doesn't want you doesn't mean you're not worthy of love. I want you. I choose you, and I'm going to make sure that everyone knows you're my sister, and that you belong with me. Sophie smiled, the first truly happy smile Marcus had seen from her. So I can stay with you forever? Forever and always, Marcus promised. But first, Daddy has some business to take care of. That evening, Marcus called Pierce from the hospital corridor. I have the DNA results. It's confirmed. Sophie is Charles's daughter and my half-sister. What's your next move? Pierce asked. Marcus looked back at Sophie's room where she was drawing pictures of their family, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. I'm going to destroy him. Charles Blackwell is going to pay for what he did to Elena and Sophie. The scientific evidence had given Marcus the weapon he needed, but confronting one of New York's most powerful men would require strategy, courage, and perfect timing. The war for Sophie's future was about to begin. The Blackwell family's traditional Sunday dinner at the Fifth Avenue mansion had always been a performance of wealth and respectability. Crystal gleamed under chandeliers, silverware caught the light of expensive artwork, and conversations flowed as smoothly as the vintage wine Charles insisted on serving. Tonight, however, would be different. Marcus arrived with Sophie, who wore a simple white dress that made her look like the innocent child she was, a stark contrast to the storm of revelation he was about to unleash. The dining room held the usual suspects. Charles at the head of the table, his wife Evelyn playing the perfect hostess, Victoria with her calculating smile, and Uncle Robert with his perpetual business concerns. Marcus, darling, Evelyn cooed, though her eyes flickered nervously over Sophie. How lovely that you brought your ward. Sophie isn't my ward, Marcus said clearly, helping Sophie into the chair beside his. She's my sister. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles's wine glass froze halfway to his lips, and Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. Excuse me, Charles managed, his voice strained. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew the DNA test results, placing them on the pristine white tablecloth like evidence in a courtroom. Sophie Elena Martinez, your daughter. Father, my half-sister. Charles's face went ashen. This is ridiculous. I don't know what kind of game you're playing. The same game you played with Elena Martinez for 3 years, Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the dining room like steel. The same game that ended with a young woman dead, and her daughter abandoned on the streets. Marcus stopped as Victoria hissed, glancing nervously at Uncle Robert. But Marcus was just getting started. He pulled out his phone and pressed play on the recorded conversation between Charles and Elena. Charles's voice filled the elegant dining room. Elena, you need to understand your position. Sophie is a complication I didn't plan for. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Uncle Robert set his wineglass down with shaking hands. You called your own daughter a complication? Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with righteous fury. You promised Elena you'd leave your wife. Promised Sophie she'd have a father, and then you abandoned them both when it became inconvenient. That's enough. Charles roared, standing up so quickly his chair toppled backward. Sophie instinctively moved closer to Marcus, but her small voice carried clearly across the room. You used to bring me toys. You said you loved me. Why did you stop coming to see me and Mama? The simple, heartbreaking question from a 6-year-old shattered whatever dignity Charles had left. Charles? Evelyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. Tell me, this isn't true. Tell me you didn't have an affair and abandon a child. It's worse than that, Marcus said, pulling out the medical examiner's report. Elena Martinez died 3 months ago from a suspicious overdose. Right after, she threatened to contact me about Sophie. The medication that killed her was stolen from Manhattan Presbyterian, where Father sits on the board of directors. Uncle Robert stood up abruptly. Are you accusing Charles of murder? I'm presenting facts, Marcus replied coldly. Elena texted Charles 3 days before her death, threatening to expose their relationship. She had scheduled an appointment with a family attorney, and then she conveniently died from medication she had no access to. Charles looked around the table, at his family's shocked faces, and finally spoke, his voice hollow. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. But you did hurt people, Sophie said softly, her child's voice more powerful than any prosecution. You hurt Mama. You hurt me. You made Mama cry every night. Charles couldn't meet Sophie's eyes. I had responsibilities, the company, the family reputation. You had a daughter, Marcus exploded, A beautiful, innocent daughter who needed her father, and you called her a complication. As the family sat in stunned silence, Marcus realized this was only the beginning. Charles Blackwell's empire of lies was crumbling, but the real battle for Sophie's future and justice for Elena was just starting. The aftermath of the family dinner confrontation sent shockwaves through New York's financial elite. By Monday morning, Charles Blackwell had resigned from the boards of 3 major corporations. His wife, Evelyn, had filed for separation, and the FBI had opened an investigation into Elena Martinez's death based on Marcus's evidence. But Marcus's focus wasn't on his father's downfall. It was on the little girl sitting across from him at breakfast, methodically eating her cereal while processing the previous night's revelations. "Daddy Marcus," Sophie said quietly, "are you sad that your father did bad things?" Marcus sat down his coffee cup, choosing his words carefully. "I'm sad that he hurt you and your mama, sweetheart. But I'm not sad that we found each other." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "Mama used to say that sometimes broken things can be fixed if someone loves them enough." The simple wisdom from a 6-year-old nearly brought Marcus to tears. "Your mama was very smart." That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would have been unthinkable just months ago. He called an emergency board meeting at Blackwell Industries and announced his resignation as CEO. "You can't be serious," Victoria protested as shocked board members murmured around the conference table. "You've worked your entire life to build this company." "I've worked my entire life, period," Marcus replied. "Sophie needs stability, therapy, and a father who's present. She's been abandoned enough for one lifetime." He turned to address the full board. "Effective immediately, I'm stepping down to focus on my family. Victoria will assume the role of interim CEO while we restructure the company's leadership." The sacrifice was enormous. Marcus was walking away from billions of dollars, decades of work, and the respect of the business world. But as he looked at Sophie, who had accompanied him to the office and now sat drawing pictures in the corner, he knew it was the right choice. "Sophie is my priority now," he continued. "Not quarterly reports, not market shares, not corporate acquisitions. My sister needs me, and I refuse to repeat my father's mistakes." Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into creating the stable, loving environment Sophie deserved. He enrolled her in therapy with Dr. Amanda Foster, a specialist in childhood trauma, who helped Sophie process her mother's death and abandonment. "She's remarkably resilient," Dr. Foster reported after their 3rd session. "The attachment she's formed with you is healthy and strong, but she'll need consistent support as she grieves her mother and processes the betrayal by your father." Marcus also initiated formal adoption proceedings, working with family court to legally establish Sophie as his daughter. The DNA evidence made the process straightforward, though the media attention was intense. "Billionaire CEO adopts half-sister" dominated headlines for weeks, but Marcus shielded Sophie from the publicity as much as possible. The most difficult moment came when Sophie asked to visit Elena's grave. "I want to tell Mama about you," she explained with the serious expression she wore when discussing important matters. "I want her to know I'm safe now." At Woodland Cemetery, Marcus knelt beside Sophie as she placed a small bouquet of daisies on Elena's headstone. "Hi, Mama," she whispered. "I found my brother. He takes care of me just like you said he would." Marcus had to turn away, overwhelmed by the combination of grief for the woman he'd never met and gratitude for the child she'd entrusted to his care. "Mama," Sophie continued her one-sided conversation. "Marcus reads me stories with funny voices, and he makes pancakes that look like dinosaurs, and he never leaves me alone when I'm scared." Sophie continued, "I think you would like him." That evening, as Marcus tucked Sophie into bed in what was now officially her room, decorated with her artwork and stuffed animals, she asked the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "Daddy Marcus, what happens to the bad grandfather now?" Marcus had been dreading this conversation. "The police are investigating what happened to your mama, sweetheart, and grandfather. He's going to have to face consequences for the choices he made." "Will we have to see him again?" "Not unless you want to," Marcus promised. "Our family is just you and me now, And maybe Aunt Victoria when she's being nice. Sophie giggled at that. She's getting nicer. She bought me the art supplies. As Sophie drifted off to sleep, Marcus realized that healing wasn't just happening for her. It was happening for him too. For the first time in his adult life, he felt purposeful beyond profit margins and acquisition strategies. But their newfound peace would soon be tested when Charles made one final, desperate attempt to reclaim control over his family's legacy and Sophie's future. 6 months after the confrontation that shattered the Blackwell family legacy, Marcus's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The penthouse that once echoed with corporate ambition now resonated with Sophie's laughter, scattered with coloring books and filled with the warm chaos of genuine family life. "Daddy, look!" Sophie burst into Marcus's home office, waving a drawing triumphantly. "Mrs. Foster says I should show you my family tree project." Marcus set aside the Elena Martinez Foundation proposal he'd been reviewing, his new philanthropic venture, focused on supporting single mothers and abandoned children, and examined Sophie's artwork with the serious attention it deserved. The drawing showed 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, labeled Daddy Marcus and Sophie. Above them, a smaller figure with wings was labeled Mama Elena watching us. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Should we put it on the refrigerator with your other masterpieces?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically, then paused with the thoughtful expression she wore when processing complex emotions. "Dr. Foster says it's okay to miss Mama and be happy with you at the same time." "Dr. Foster is very wise," Marcus agreed. "People we love never really leave us, even when they can't be with us anymore." The past months had been a careful balance of healing and legal battles. The FBI investigation into Elena's death had uncovered enough evidence to bring charges against Charles, though his team of expensive lawyers was fighting every step. More importantly, the adoption proceedings had been finalized, making Sophie legally and permanently Marcus's daughter. Victoria's transformation had been perhaps the most surprising development. Initially resistant to Sophie's presence, she had gradually warmed to her niece, especially after witnessing Marcus's complete devotion to the child's well-being. "Uncle Marcus," Victoria called from the kitchen, "Sophie's lunch is ready and her tutor will be here in 30 minutes. Marcus smiled at the Uncle Marcus designation Sophie had insisted upon for clarity. "Victoria is Aunt Victoria, but you're Daddy Marcus because you chose to be my daddy," Sophie had explained with 6-year-old logic that made perfect sense. Sophie skipped toward the kitchen as Marcus's phone rang with a call he'd been expecting. Pierce's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus, I have news about Charles." "Go ahead." "His legal team has approached the district attorney about a plea deal. He's willing to provide full disclosure about Elena's death in exchange for reduced charges." Marcus felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. What's he admitting to? Intimidation, emotional abuse, and financial coercion. But not murder. The evidence suggests Elena's overdose was suicide brought on by his threats and abandonment, but they can't prove he directly caused her death. Will he go to prison? Likely 3 to 5 years plus significant financial penalties. He'll also be required to establish a trust fund for Sophie's future, essentially compensation for the child support. He never paid. Marcus absorbed this information quietly. Justice, even imperfect justice, was finally coming for Elena. "There's something else," Pice continued. "Charles has requested to see Sophie one last time before sentencing. He claims he wants to apologize." "Absolutely not," Marcus replied immediately. "Sophie doesn't need his apologies. She needs stability and protection from further trauma." That evening, as Marcus and Sophie worked on a jigsaw puzzle together, their new Sunday tradition, Sophie brought up the subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Daddy, some kids at school asked why my grandfather is on the news." Marcus sat down a puzzle piece, choosing his words carefully. "What did you tell them?" "I said my grandfather made some bad choices, but my daddy is good and takes care of me." Sophie found a corner piece and placed it. "Precisely. Is that right?" "That's exactly right. Sweetheart, sometimes people and families make mistakes, even big mistakes, but that doesn't change who we choose to be or how we choose to love each other." Sophie nodded solemnly. Then, brightened. "Mrs. Peterson at school says, I'm lucky to have such a Good, Daddy, I'm the lucky one, Marcus corrected, pulling her close for a hug that had become as natural as breathing. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus stood in his office looking at the framed photo on his desk. Not a corporate achievement or business milestone, but a candid shot of him and Sophie at the park. Both laughing as they fed ducks. It represented everything he'd gained by losing everything he'd thought mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Board meeting went well. Company stock is stabilizing. More importantly, Sophie's writing lesson is confirmed for Saturday. She's getting quite good. Marcus smiled, realizing that rebuilding their family hadn't just saved Sophie. It had saved him too. The driven, isolated businessman, who had rescued a hungry child from the street 6 months ago, no longer existed in his place, was a father who understood that the most valuable acquisition of his life couldn't be measured in dollars or market share. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued healing, but tonight Marcus felt something he'd never experienced in his corporate success: complete contentment with the life he'd chosen to build. 2 years had passed since Marcus Blackwell first encountered a hungry little girl outside his office building, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The sterile penthouse had become a warm family home, filled with Sophie's artwork, her piano practice echoing through rooms that once knew only the silence of corporate solitude. "Daddy, Mrs. Henderson says I'm ready for the advanced reading group," Sophie announced, bursting through the front door with Rosalie now a permanent fixture in their lives as both nanny and family friend at 8 years old. Sophie had blossomed into a confident, articulate child whose trauma had been carefully healed through love therapy and unwavering stability. Her dark hair was now always neatly braided. Her clothes fit perfectly, and most importantly, ears sparkled with the security of knowing she was unconditionally loved. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Marcus replied, looking up from the foundation documents spread across the dining table. "Advanced reading group means you'll be reading the same books as kids, 2 grades older." The Elena Martinez Foundation had grown beyond Marcus's wildest expectations. What began as a tribute to Sophie's mother had evolved into a comprehensive support system for single mothers facing abandonment, children in crisis, and families navigating legal battles for custody and support. "Mr. Marcus," Rosalie said, settling her purse on the counter. The reporter from Times Magazine confirmed tomorrow's interview about the Foundation's 2nd anniversary. "She'll want to speak with Sophie too, if that's acceptable," Marcus nodded. Sophie had become remarkably poised when discussing their story, understanding that sharing their experience helped other children in similar situations. Her therapist, Dr. Foster, had praised Sophie's resilience and her ability to transform trauma into empathy for others. "Daddy, can I tell them about the surprise?" Sophie asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Marcus smiled at her enthusiasm. The surprise was the Foundation's newest initiative, the Elena Martinez Family Housing Complex, a beautiful residential facility in Queens designed to provide temporary housing, child care, and job training for mothers and children in crisis. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for next week, and Sophie would be cutting the ribbon alongside Marcus. "You can tell them about the housing complex, but remember, the other surprise is still secret," Marcus reminded her with a conspiratorial wink. The other surprise was something Marcus had been planning for months: legal papers to officially change Sophie's last name from Martinez to Blackwell. Martinez, honoring both her mother's heritage and her new family identity. Sophie had requested this, herself wanting to carry both her mother's memory and her father's love in her name. "Uncle Victoria is coming to dinner again tonight," Sophie announced, using her unique title for Marcus's sister. "She promised to help me practice my speech for the ribbon cutting." Victoria's relationship with Sophie had evolved into something beautiful and unexpected. The initially resistant aunt had become one of Sophie's strongest advocates, taking pride in her niece's accomplishments and fiercely protective of her well-being. She had also stepped successfully into the CEO role at Blackwell Industries, implementing family-friendly policies and ethical business practices that Marcus had only dreamed of during his corporate years. That evening, over a dinner of Sophie's favorite spaghetti and meatballs, the three of them discussed the upcoming ceremony Sophie had been practicing, her short speech for weeks, wanting to honor her mother's memory while inspiring other children not to lose hope. "I want to tell them that families can be made in different ways," Sophie explained earnestly. Some kids get born into their families, but some kids get chosen like me, and being chosen can be just as special. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever Sophie demonstrated wisdom far beyond her 8 years. "You know what I love most about our story?" Victoria said, reaching across the table to squeeze Sophie's hand. "It shows that good things can come from terrible situations. Your mama's love led you to Marcus, and Marcus's love has created something beautiful for hundreds of other families. Do you think Mama knows about the foundation?" Sophie asked a question she'd posed many times over the past 2 years. "I think she knows," Marcus replied, as he always did, "and I think she's proud of the strong, kind, brilliant daughter she raised." Later that night, after Sophie was asleep and Victoria had gone home, Marcus stood in his home office reviewing the final details for the housing complex. Opening on his desk sat 2 photographs, one of Elena Martinez from her nursing school graduation, which they'd found among her personal effects, and one of Sophie at her school's honor roll ceremony last month. Beaming with pride, the foundation had already helped over 500 families, prevented dozens of children from entering the foster care system, and provided legal assistance to mothers facing abandonment by wealthy, powerful men who thought their money could erase their responsibilities. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Pierce, who now served as the foundation's head of investigations. "Charles's sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month. Maximum sentence, likely justice for Elena, is finally coming." Marcus nodded at the news but felt no satisfaction in his father's downfall. His energy was focused entirely on the future he was building with Sophie and the legacy they were creating together. Tomorrow's magazine interview would mark exactly 2 years since their journey began. Sophie wanted to wear the blue dress she'd picked out special for the occasion and had prepared answers to questions about how their family had grown and changed. But the real celebration would come next week, when Sophie would stand before hundreds of people at the housing complex, groundbreaking, and tell the world that love could triumph over abandonment, that families could be chosen as well as born, and that Elena Martinez's legacy would live on in every child who found safety and hope through their foundation. The autumn sun cast golden light across the construction site in Queens, where the Elena Martinez family housing complex would soon stand. Hundreds of people gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony, families who had been helped by the foundation, social workers, city officials, and media representatives who had followed Marcus and Sophie's remarkable journey from the beginning. Sophie stood beside Marcus at the podium, wearing her special blue dress and holding the oversized ceremonial scissors that would cut the ribbon. At 9 years old, she had grown into a poised, confident young lady whose presence commanded attention not through wealth or status, but through the genuine warmth that radiated from her every word. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the crowd. 3 years ago, I was a different man living a different life. I thought success meant profit margins and corporate acquisitions. I had everything, money, goodbye, but I had nothing that mattered." He paused, looking down at Sophie, who smiled encouragingly. "Then I met a little girl who was hungry and scared, abandoned by circumstances beyond her control. I thought I was rescuing her, but the truth is, she rescued me. Sophie taught me that family isn't just about blood relations, it's about choice, commitment, and unconditional love." Sophie stepped forward to the microphone, which had been adjusted to her height. Her voice was clear and strong as she began the speech she'd practiced countless times. "My name is Sophie Elena Blackwell Martinez," she said proudly. 3 years ago, my mama went to heaven and I was all alone. I was hungry and scared, and I didn't know if anyone would ever love me again." The crowd was completely silent, captivated by this young girl's courage. "But then my daddy Marcus found me. He chose to love me even though he didn't have to. He chose to be my family even though I wasn't born into his family. And now we're building this place so other kids like me can know that they're not alone. And other mamas like my mama, Elena, can get help when they need it most." Sophie's voice grew stronger with each word. "Some people think families have to look the same or come from the same place. But I learned that the best families are made from love. My mama, Elena, loved me so much that she made sure I would find my way to safety. And my daddy Marcus loves me so much that he changed his whole life to take care of me." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as Sophie continued. "This building is going to be named after my mama because she was brave and strong and kind. She was a nurse who helped people feel better, and now this place will help families feel better too. Kids who are scared will be safe here. Mamas who are alone will have friends here. And everyone will know that they matter. Sophie paused, looking out at the crowd, with the same compassionate eyes that had first captured Marcus's attention 3 years ago. I want every kid who comes here to know what I know now. Just because someone leaves you doesn't mean you're not worth loving. Just because someone abandons you doesn't mean you're not special, and just because your family looks different doesn't mean it's not real. The crowd erupted in applause as Sophie raised the ceremonial scissors. This building is for my mama Elena, for my daddy Marcus, and for every family that needs a place to heal and grow and love each other together. Marcus and Sophie cut the ribbon, and the crowd cheered as construction workers began breaking ground on the facility that would house up to 50 families at a time, providing not just shelter but comprehensive support services, childcare, job training, and legal assistance. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Marcus knelt beside Sophie, pulling her close. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Your mama would be incredibly proud too. Do you think she knows? Sophie asked the question she'd been asking for 3 years. I think she's been watching over us this whole time, Marcus replied. I think she guided you to me that night, and I think she's smiling right now, seeing how many families we're going to help. As they walked back to their car, Sophie slipped her hand into Marcus's. Daddy, do you remember when you used to be sad all the time? Marcus laughed, surprised by her question. I didn't realize I was sad until you showed me what happy felt like. Good, Sophie said matter-of-factly, because now we're both happy, and we're going to help lots of other people be happy too. That evening, as they sat in their living room, Sophie working on homework while Marcus reviewed foundation business. Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The ruthless businessman, who had once measured success in quarterly profits, had been replaced by a father who measured success in bedtime stories. Reed scraped knees, comforted, and the security of knowing that Sophie went to sleep every night, knowing she was loved. The Elena Martinez Foundation had grown beyond his wildest dreams, helping over 1,000 families and preventing countless children from experiencing the abandonment Sophie had endured. But more than that, it had created a legacy of hope, proof that love could triumph over abandonment, that families could be chosen as well as born, and that one person's decision to care could change the world. Daddy, Sophie said, looking up from her math homework. Will you read me a story tonight? Of course, sweetheart. Which one? Sophie grinned. The one about the businessman and the little girl who saved each other. Marcus smiled, understanding she meant their story, Thiwon. They lived every day. That's my favorite story too. As they headed upstairs together, Marcus realized that Elena Martinez had given him the greatest gift imaginable. Not just her daughter's love, but the chance to become the man he was meant to be. And in return, he had given Sophie something Charles Blackwell never could: the certainty that she was chosen, cherished, and would never be alone. Again, their journey had begun, with hunger and abandonment, but it had led to a love that would echo through generations of families who found hope in the Elena Martinez family housing complex. Proof that sometimes the most broken beginnings can create the most beautiful endings.